The valley saw wild weather over the Thanksgiving holiday with 3 tornadoes touching down.
And there's been some conversation on social media asking if this was tied to climate change.
Jordan Evans is with us now to tell us whether there's actually any truth to this.
Yeah, it's very interesting you bring that up, Jordan, because I have seen a lot of conversation on Twitter about was climate change responsible for the tornadoes that we saw here in the valley last weekend? And the simple answer is no, and I'll explain why here in just a minute. But let's give you kind of a historical context of tornadoes here in the valley. In fact, for a day that we saw more than one tornado here in Maricopa County, we have to go all the way back to 1992 for when the last time that happened. And for the total number of tornadoes that we have seen here in Maricopa County, that number sits at 62, including the 4 that we saw so far this year, and that data goes all the way back to 1950 at least. So still a lot less than what we would see compared to states out in the Midwest. But talking about Friday again, here's a look at radar. In fact, the National Weather Service issuing 2 tornado warnings within the same hour. That first one for northern sections of the valley, including Paradise Valley and North Scottsdale, and the second one for southeastern sections like Gilbert, Apache Junction, and northern sections of Queen Creek too, because these tornadoes spawned with very little to no warning, and they did unfortunately cause quite a bit of damage. So take a look at some of these photos. In fact, trees toppling onto some cars and even falling onto homes in some places too. And good news is no reports of any injuries or fatalities, but still quite a bit of damage. So let's talk about the setup, because this was something that's not very common here in the valley, very common out in the Midwest actually. So we need 3 things to spawn these kind of tornadoes that we had. And the first one is a cold front, and we had a very intense one from that bomb cyclone that we saw last week. The second thing is a lot of moisture coming up from the south, and we had it being pumped up by very strong winds here at the surface. That third ingredient, and this is probably the most important one, is wind shear. And wind shear is simply the changing of wind speed and direction with height in the atmosphere. So let's give you a breakdown of that. Behind the cold front, you have really strong winds coming out of the northwest. Now here at the surface, we had very strong winds coming out of the south, anywhere from gusting up to 40 to 50 miles per hour. But as you go several thousand feet up in the atmosphere, notice the winds begin to change with direction out of the southwest. Meteorologists, we call that veering winds, where winds tend to change in a clockwise manner as you go up with height in the atmosphere. That causes the air to rotate, and we could see that on the velocity couplets of radar. In fact, you can see right here, we get these little turnings of the greens and red. That is the rotation that we saw in some of these storms as they progressed from west to east through the valleys. So again, take a look at the destruction. It speaks for itself in this picture. In fact, entire trees uprooted because of the strong winds in these tornadoes. So let's go back to the conversation about, was climate change a factor in these tornadoes? And the simple answer is no, because when we talk about climate change is a look at the long-term pattern of the planet's warming. And the planet's warming means warmer oceans and more water vapor in the atmosphere. And those are 2 key ingredients to allow storm systems to intensify. So that's exactly what happened with that bomb cyclone last week. But the National Weather Service telling me that we cannot base one event off of climate change. The only thing that they can tell me is that they have happened before, and they will happen again. Live in the Weather Center, Jordan Evans, Cronkite News.